Hey, greetings. Thanks for joining me. It's Fred in Alaska. What I wanted to share with you today comes from Todd and Alicia. Now, from what Todd was telling me, for over 30 years, beachcombing was his and his wife's thing. Like, he beachcombed when he was younger as a commercial salmon fisherman. One of the boats he was on as a kid beached and had to do some repairs, and he went beachcombing just to kill time because he wasn't part of the mechanic aspect of it. He was just there to pull net. So Todd, like, instantly he found some of those glass balls that had the webbing on it from Korean fishing boats and stuff. So I mean, he was hooked. Found a walrus skull and some other stuff. So he was bit by the bug, the beachcombing bug, and so he got his pilot's license a couple years after that, and he spent literally 30 years beachcombing. He would fly around the state. He would, has been everywhere from Platinum on down to the, southeast Alaska, just beachcombing. Wherever he could find a safe place to land, he would land. He would, beach the craft and then go beachcombing, him and his wife, after he got married. His wife had only partook about, 20 years of that, just all the time. And that it was their thing to do up until, it got too cold to do it every year. He basically broke it down to where he worked so he could beachcomb, so he could afford the fuel and to be able to maintenance, the plane and all that. And so he literally was a slave to beachcombing. Those are his words. So they were down in southeast Alaska, and they had bounced between 3 different islands, and he gave me a general location. I will throw that up in a map right here. He just gave general location. This place isn't too far from other inhabited places. And from what he dealt with, he doesn't want to be the guy that says, oh, here's the spot, and people potentially going there and getting themselves in trouble, right? So it was the third island of the day. It was larger than the other two because the other two, they landed. Him and Alicia beachcombed all the way around, found a bunch of trash and plastic, and they were like, let's try a bigger one, and, we'll call it a day. So Todd, he took off. He circled around. He found the one. They flew low looking for any sign of bears on the beach and, stuff like that because they didn't want any conflict. Of course, he had a gun in his plane. So they land, and he said it was weird. When he tied off the plane, he noticed weird noises in the woods, but there was a wind higher than ground level. And so it was blowing the tops of the trees, but not at surface level. So he chalked it up to that. Branches are breaking and falling from the wind. So, no big deal. He grabbed his gun, of course, because there's been times he didn't bring it, and all of a sudden there was a bear come out on the beach right behind him, right? So he brings his rifle. It was a 30-06. And so him and his wife would take turns. Like, they weren't intentionally leapfrogging, but one would get caught up looking at some stuff, and the other one would continue on a little ways and then catch up and then continue on, or sometimes they were together, but always within eyesight. And Todd said that as they were going along the whole time, once he tied off and he heard those weird noises in the woods, something kept drawing his attention to the woods. He didn't know why. He had his rifle, he checked it a couple times to make sure he had a round in it, and he said he had never felt so uneasy with nothing around. No one was around. There was no signs of bear. There was no bear tracks on the beach. There wasn't even, deer sign or any animal sign whatsoever. So he just chalked it up to something's just off with the wind, and I'm just being freaked out, right? He chalked it up, left it alone. And as they go a little further, at this point there, a good half mile from the plane, was his estimate, because they were doing a lot of staring at their feet, looking at the ground and stuff, right? Just looking for washed up artifacts. Well, he said they're going along, and he hears this super sharp whistle off to his left-hand side, and it stopped him and his wife both. And Alicia was like, what was that? That was real loud. And he said he never heard a bird or anything else make such a just loud, sharp, crisp whistle, just real short, super loud. He said it was almost ear piercing how loud it was, but it was so short. It was just like he said it was the damnedest thing. So of course their attention's caught and they're looking off into the trees. Alicia's quasi standing behind him, and they're about, he said 30 feet from the grassy edge. You know, you got the rocky beach going up with a little bit of sand and stuff, and then a bit of beach, and then the grass was kind of hanging down in some shrubs and stuff. And, you know, there's a wind-blown area there, and he's looking at it, and he's looking into the grass, and he sees a little bit of movement. So he's like, oh, man, I wonder what that is, you know, because he had no reference point in that moment. He had other than bear. So, you know, he goes, man, I think I seen a bear moving. And he has Alicia go with him, and there was it was a big rock. It was about 5 foot tall and about 10 foot in diameter. And it was kind of like a little pinnacle a little further down the beach. So they went over there just to have something to be behind, you know, and keep an eye out for this bear. So as they're standing there, you know, he has Alicia go to the other side of this rock and look down the beach, because he, you know, his view was obscured to his right-hand side because he was off to the left-hand side of the rock looking at the trees, just waiting to see this bear. She's on the opposite side of the rock, and she's doing the same thing, but, you know, looking further down. He said it got super, super quiet. They could hear the wind blowing up high. And he kept getting distracted by the wind blowing, because when the wind would blow, it seems like he'd hear more cracking. And so he started assessing it like, man, that's a lot of extra cracking when the wind blows. Like, you know, something wasn't adding up to him, and he was sticking to that feeling. He was like, something's not right. And so as he's sitting there considering everything it could be, and, you know, just second guessing himself, all of a sudden his wife is beside him, and she's pale. And he's like, what's going on? Did you see it? Did you see it? And she goes, yeah, you could see it from the other side of this rock. And so instead of going back around like she did towards the ocean side, he went on the beach side and came around to get a look. And he saw this thing squatted down. He said it was about 75 feet away. And it was squatted down, and all he could see was just this brown thing. He couldn't make out arms, legs, head, anything. It was just a brown kind of mound. And he said at first he was like, he was asking his wife, are you sure? Because that looks like something just, you know, sloughed from the bank, just erosion, kind of, you know, a mound of grass maybe. And she goes, no, I watched it walk out and squat down. And he goes, tell me what you saw. And she said, it looked like a man. It looked like a very large man with hair all over it. And he's right there, you know, and she's in shock, but she's very, you know, precise and very, you know, forceful about what she saw. She said, that is a man over there, you know, a very large man at that. And Todd's kind of thrown off. He's like, well, what do you mean large man? She said, it looked like he was wearing a hair coat of some kind, but he was very, very large. So he's looking at this mound. She's telling him this, and he's trying to put it together. His 30-06 didn't have a scope. It had open sights, but he did have some binoculars. So he had his wife digging his little day pack off his back while he's keeping an eye on this thing to dig out his binoculars. She hands them to him, and they're just a little small set, you know, a little 3 or 4 by. And he takes a look at it, and he said as soon as he put eyes on it through the binocular, it stood up and walked off the beach. Like, instant. As soon as he put the binoculars up, as he was trying to focus on it, this thing stood up before he could really get a look at it, and it walked off. But he did say it walked off on 2 legs, and so did his wife. So it goes off into the trees, and he's just like, holy crap. So immediately he's like, hey, let's back out of here. Let's just find somewhere else to beachcomb or go on about our way. Alicia's all for it. She's like, yeah, let's go. You know, let's go. So from what Todd was telling me, when they turned around and they started going back up the beach towards, you know, they had a half a mile or so to go down this beach. Wind's blowing. It's kind of loud. You know, the wind's above them. It's not at surface level, but the wind is obscuring all the noises of the woods. And as they're going along, he said, I intentionally slowed my pace so I wasn't creating a chase kind of instinct, you know, that predator chase instinct. And he said he wished he had walked faster because as they were walking, they started hearing breaking and noises getting ahead of them. And it got to a point where he was like, well, whatever this is now ahead of us, because just the sheer amount of noise that was going on, even when the wind gusts were died down and he could hear clearly, something was making noise off to their right, up into the trees, right? He said this island, there was a good maybe 100 feet of beach to the, hard shoreline, where the slough and erosion was with the grass and, all the smaller shrubs. And then another maybe 100 feet before it started going up on the sheer rock and stuff, right? Because this is Southeast Alaska. Most things are fjord-like, He said he was trying to figure out what best route to take as far as what they were doing, because he felt like imminent danger was in front of him. But he's torn because the plane is just down a ways. He knows right where the plane is, and that's, basically safety. We'll get out of here with that. Well, he also said that when they stopped and he was, thinking about, he's bouncing ideas off his wife. And she goes, let's get in the water and just walk in the water and make more distance. He's like, no, we could get hypothermia before we even get to the plane, because she's freaking out. She's hearing the same noises, and she's trying to show a brave face and support Todd, in his decision. But she's like, we need to just hurry up to the plane then. Let's just go. We'll stay as close to the water as possible and get to the plane. So that was their game plan. So as they start along, they're moving at a pretty good clip. But one portion of the beach, there's this one area with pretty big rocks and stuff, so it wasn't going to be easy. They'd have to cut further up towards the bank, to kind of negotiate these rocks. So from what Alicia said, at that point when they got to those rocks, from her vantage point behind him about 5 feet, giving him room because he was holding the gun in his hands and kind of constantly, head on a swivel looking back and forth. She was giving him distance in case he had to do something, right? And she said as they were going along and they reached that point and were about to go around it, all of a sudden she heard a tch, like a rock hitting rocks. And so she looks down and she noticed a fresh scuff place with a rock, just a small one, not quite the size of an apple, had landed by them. And so she pointed it out to Todd, said, hey, there was a rock that just hit back here. And he goes, I heard it. Are you sure it was a rock? Was it thrown, or did you accidentally kick it? He's trying to process of elimination. She was like, I didn't kick anything. I've been, tiptoeing behind you, and so on. So Todd said, all right, let's get moving. So they had to cut back towards the bank. And as they're kind of doing this half moon to get around this cluster of rocks they didn't want to mess with going over because it was slimy and slippery because of the tide and all that kind of stuff, right? Todd said when they got to about the apex of that half moon, the trees lit up off to the right. All he heard was this screaming, wailing, and a bunch of breaking branches and just chaotic noise. Immediately, he is like, has a rifle up, he's got it pointed in that direction, he clicks the safety off, and he said as he was standing there surveying, just going back and forth with the gun, just looking for whatever's doing this, Alicia behind him starts crying and saying, let's just go, we gotta move. And he agrees. He was just making sure that it wasn't imminently gonna just like come bursting out of the trees. So he has her go a little ways ahead, then he catches up to her, has her go a little further ahead, and while he was doing that, he was keeping the rifle on the tree line. He said once they got past that half moon area, they came around a little bit of it was mainly sandy area right in that spot, and they could see the plane just down a ways, right? And so he had a little sense of relief, and they're going along, and he keeps looking off to his right. The noises kind of died down. They kind of stayed back in that area where the rocks were. And so he started calming down a little bit, but he's super on edge, hyped up. I mean, something screaming. They saw this thing walking. He said they got within 150 yards of the plane, and at the point where he stopped holding the rifle in his hands and kind of slung it over his shoulder because there was a little more beach there, it went to about 120 feet before the brush and the tree line started. He felt a little more room to move, and not so, overly cautious. Well, I guess you can't be in those situations, but so he said no sooner than he slings the rifle over his shoulder, all of a sudden this thing showed itself again. And he said as soon as he got it up onto his shoulder, about half the distance, so about roughly 70 yards between him and the plane, this thing walked out onto the beach. He said it took about 7 steps to get to the water. It squatted down by the water, kind of glanced over its shoulder at them, like paying them no mind, but kind of like acknowledging they were there, and they're stopped. And he's, he unslung the rifle, of course, and he's holding it again. And he said this thing just kind of messed around in the water a little bit, stood up, looked at them in their direction, then turned and walked right back up the beach just like it was another day. And, I asked him, I said, what did you feel in that moment? Like, do you think it was sizing you up, or what do you think? And he was like, I have no clue, but it just, as soon as he slung the rifle, it showed itself, walked out right down to the water line, kind of squatted down, turned and looked towards them, swirled his hands in the water, stood up, turned and faced him, and then turned and then walked right back away. He said it all happened literally that fast. And he said he was surprised how very few steps it took for it to get there and get back. And I asked him, well, how tall do you think it was? And he guesstimated 12 foot tall. He said it wasn't overly thick and, muscular. You could tell it was fit, but it was more lanky. He said the length of the arms, the way it moved, was just so surreal. He said it was almost like watching the Patterson-Gimlin footage with a skinnier creature that's a little taller. I asked about what it looked like. He didn't have a very good look at it as far as its facial features. He said the skin was obviously way darker than the hair. He said the hair was kind of a lighter brown, kind of a slightly grizzled look to it, and the skin tone was very, very dark. And I said, well, was it like black dark or lighter than that? And he said, honestly, with the way the lighting and everything was, he could not tell, but it was very, very dark skinned. He couldn't make out the eyes. He could tell that whatever this thing was, much bigger than them. But it was just, there wasn't enough, because of his shock and everything going on. He didn't get a lot of detail with that, which, that's whatever. So once this thing clears the beach and is back up in the trees, they hear that sharp whistle again. And when he hears that sharp whistle, he's looking in that direction because it was so loud and crisp. It was startling. It startled him because it was unexpected. Like most of this, goodness. So he's like standing there. Alicia's pulling on his sleeve of his the shirt he was wearing, saying, let's go, let's go, let's go. And so they start walking again. And he is he said he was so indecisive. He was having a hard time walking because he kept stutter stepping, because he wanted to stand there and stand his ground, basically. And, he knew he had to get to the plane. And he freely admits there was no overt aggression outside of the breaking of the limbs and all the noise, but there was no active trying to get them or anything like that. It was just so surreal to have this thing at one moment stand up and walk off, and then further down the beach for it to just walk down and then walk back. Just kind of like took a look at him and then walked away. And to me, it sounded like the thing sized him up, see if it was going to shoot or not, because it nonchalantly walks to the water, kind of splashes around, kind of glances over at him and turns, faces him, and then walks off. Who knows? It's all speculation. So once he stops stutter stepping, he catches himself. They're in a full-blown run after some of the stutter stepping, just full-blown run. Todd said his lungs were burning so bad he hadn't run in years, right? Sedentary life, outside of flying around and stuff, and beachcombing, which is nice, cardio for walking. But he said he couldn't remember the last time he ran before that. They got to the plane. he got her in, got it turned around, did all his stuff, untied, of course. And he said when they fired up the plane and he was looking around, like really, really looking around, he said he noticed it further back by where he was stutter stepping, just at basically where it walked out from and then walked back. It was basically right there, right at the beach line, just squatted down and just kind of looking over at him, just kind of like just watching him, just not doing nothing, just sitting there watching him. I asked how it was sitting, and he said it was just kind of squatted down, just kind of like, arms kind of resting on the ground, just like didn't have a care in the world, and was just watching them. So he fired up, he took off. He said he got about 2 miles away and wanted to go back low and buzz and get another look, right? Just because he was so in shock over what he was seeing. Alicia, over the years, he had taught her how to fly, right? And Alicia said that when they initially took off, he was in a hard climb, like, almost to the point of a stall. He was so freaked out. So she had to like literally calm him down and kind of push the yoke forward a little bit, like, hey, dude, you're climbing a little too steep, right? So yeah, and when they came back by, there was no sign of it. As they're flying by, they noticed the impressions in the ground from when it walked out and then walked back, but they were already gone. They were already out of there. This happened during the pandemic time, and it was a way for them to escape. Of course, he did it all the time anyway, but they did a lot more of it during that period. But once that happened, he said, honestly, it's been since then that he has not like actively been out beachcombing, which is unfortunate. And I tried to encourage him. I was like, well, you had a gun and it didn't technically hurt anyone. And he said it was the visual of all of a sudden this thing that he's heard stories here and there, but he never really gave it any leeway either for or against. It was just a story, and yeah, he doesn't look at it the same way at all. Totally understandable. I want to thank Todd for reaching out. Also Gregory for making the connection and getting him in contact with me. I appreciate that, Gregory. Shout out to you. What else was there? Nope, that was it on this one. I want to thank you guys for joining me. The snow is melting here, and we're going to be out on excursions very, very soon. I got cabin fever like hell, man. The last excursion was to the glacier, and it was still freaking cold as shit. But anyway, thank you guys for joining me, and we'll catch you on the next one.